I never thought I'd be the type of person to orchestrate public revenge, but sometimes life pushes you to a breaking point where quiet dignity just isn't enough anymore. My mother-in-law, Margaret Maggie Carter, had always been a force of nature in our small North Carolina town of Willow Creek, the kind of woman who knew everyone's business and wasn't shy about sharing her opinions on it. But when she decided to turn my pregnancy into her latest gossip project, she crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Let me start from the beginning, because the setup matters in stories like these. I met Daniel Carter 3 years ago at a coffee shop in downtown Willow Creek, where I'd just moved to start my remote marketing consulting business. He was everything you'd want in a Southern gentleman: polite, hardworking, and genuinely kind. As a mechanical engineer at the local manufacturing plant, he was well respected in our tight-knit community of about 15,000 people. The kind of place where your business becomes everyone's business, whether you like it or not. Daniel's relationship with his mother had always been complicated. Maggie Carter was 56 years old and had spent the last 32 years being the center of her son's universe. She was active in every church committee, garden club, and charity organization in town. People knew her, respected her opinion, and frankly, feared crossing her. She had opinions about everything, from the mayor's new parking ordinances to Mrs. Henderson's choice of tulip colors for her front garden. When Daniel and I got engaged, Maggie's reaction was polite but cool. I wasn't from Willow Creek originally. I'd grown up about 2 hours away in Charlotte, which already marked me as an outsider. I worked from home, which Maggie found unconventional. And perhaps most damning of all, I hadn't immediately fallen into the role of doting future daughter-in-law, hanging on her every word and seeking her approval for my life choices. "She just needs time to warm up to you," Daniel would say whenever I mentioned his mother's chilly demeanor. "She's very protective of family." I tried to be understanding. I really did. I showed up to every Sunday dinner at their sprawling colonial-style home on Magnolia Avenue. I brought desserts, complimented her cooking, and listened politely to her stories about the good old days of Willow Creek. But there was always an undercurrent of judgment, a sense that I was being evaluated and found wanting. The wedding planning was a particular nightmare. Maggie had opinions about everything: the flowers, the venue, the guest list, even my dress. She managed to insert herself into every decision while maintaining plausible deniability. "I'm just trying to help," she'd say with that saccharine smile. "I know so many lovely vendors in town." Daniel, bless his heart, genuinely couldn't see the manipulation. He was raised to respect his mother's opinions and keep family harmony at all costs. Confrontation made him physically uncomfortable. So I learned to bite my tongue, smile, and save my venting for my best friend Claire, who lived in our townhouse complex and had become my sanity anchor in this small-town social maze. Fast forward to this past March. Daniel and I had been married for 8 months and trying to conceive for about 4 of them. When I saw those 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test, I was over the moon. Daniel literally whooped with joy and spun me around our kitchen until I was dizzy and laughing. We were going to be parents. We decided to wait until the 12-week mark to tell family, following the conventional wisdom about the first trimester. But once we hit that milestone, we couldn't contain our excitement. Sunday dinner at the Carter house seemed like the perfect opportunity to share our news with everyone at once. The usual suspects were there that March evening: Daniel and me, Maggie and her husband Robert, Daniel's stepfather, a quiet man who'd learned long ago to nod along with whatever Maggie said, Maggie's sister Linda, who was equally invested in everyone else's business, and Daniel's cousin Jeff with his wife Sarah. It was a full house, which made it feel even more special to share our announcement. I waited until we'd finished Maggie's famous pot roast and were settling into dessert. My hands were actually shaking a little as I looked at Daniel and nodded. He cleared his throat. "Actually, everyone, Emily and I have some news to share," he said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "We're expecting. Emily's 12 weeks pregnant." The reaction was mixed. Jeff and Sarah immediately burst into congratulations, Sarah practically bouncing in her seat as she bombarded me with questions about due dates and whether we wanted to know the gender. Robert smiled warmly and raised his sweet tea in a toast. Even Linda seemed genuinely pleased, asking about morning sickness and sharing stories from her own pregnancies 30 years ago. But Maggie's reaction was different. Her smile was tight, controlled. She said the right words: "Oh, how wonderful and what exciting news," but something felt off. There was a flatness to her voice, a lack of genuine warmth that everyone else had displayed. She asked exactly 2 questions: when I was due, November, and whether I'd been to the doctor yet. Yes, multiple times. Then she changed the subject to the church's upcoming Easter fundraiser. I tried to tell myself I was being oversensitive. Maybe she was just processing the news, or maybe she was worried about being a grandmother at 56. But the seed of unease was planted. The first sign something was wrong came about a week later. I was at the grocery store picking up ingredients for dinner when Mrs. Patterson, who ran the local flower shop, approached me in the cereal aisle. "Emily, honey," she said with that particular southern tone that immediately puts you on alert. "I heard the most interesting news about you and Daniel." I smiled, assuming she was going to congratulate me on the pregnancy. Word travels fast in small towns, and I figured Maggie or Linda had mentioned it to someone. "Oh, you mean about the baby?" I said. "Yes, we're so excited." Mrs. Patterson's expression grew confused, then almost pitying. "Well, I heard from Maggie at the garden club meeting that you might be, well, that maybe you're not actually pregnant? That maybe you're just looking for attention." The bottom fell out of my stomach. I stood there holding a box of Cheerios, trying to process what I'd just heard. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to say. "I probably shouldn't have said anything," Mrs. Patterson backpedaled quickly. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. You know how these things get twisted when they're passed along." But I knew it wasn't a misunderstanding. I knew exactly where this had come from. I finished my shopping in a daze and drove home with my heart pounding. The moment I walked through the door, I called Claire. She said, "What?" Claire practically shouted into the phone. "That's insane, Emily. Why would anyone fake a pregnancy?" "I don't know," I said, slumping onto my couch. "But apparently Maggie thinks I'm doing it for attention. What kind of attention would I even want? I work from home. I barely know half the people in this town." Claire was quiet for a moment. "Have you told Daniel?" "Not yet. He's not home from work." "But Claire, what if this spreads? What if everyone starts thinking I'm some kind of manipulative liar?" "Then we'll deal with it," she said firmly. "But first, you need to talk to your husband. This is his mother causing the problem." That evening, I told Daniel what had happened at the grocery store. I watched his face go through several emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, a resigned kind of anger. "I'll talk to her," he said. "This is ridiculous. You're clearly pregnant, Emily. Anyone with eyes can see how excited you are, how you've been taking care of yourself, eating better, taking vitamins." "That's just it, though," I said. "I'm not showing yet. I still look pretty much the same as I did 3 months ago. Maybe that's why she thinks she can get away with this." Daniel ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd learned meant he was stressed. "I'll talk to her tomorrow after work." Daniel did talk to Maggie, but according to him, it didn't go well. "She said she was just expressing some concerns to a few close friends," he reported back to me that evening. "She says she didn't mean for it to become gossip, and she was just worried that maybe you were confused about the timing or something." "Confused about the timing?" I repeated. "Daniel, I've been to the doctor 3 times. I've had blood work. I've seen the baby on an ultrasound. What exactly would I be confused about?" I know, he said, holding up his hands. "I told her that. She said she was sorry if her concerns got taken the wrong way, and she promised not to discuss it with anyone else." But the damage was already done, and the promise was apparently meaningless. Over the next week, I had 3 more encounters that made it clear Maggie's whisper campaign was far from over. The pharmacist at CVS asked me how I was feeling with a knowing look that made my skin crawl. The receptionist at Daniel's office, where I sometimes picked him up for lunch, made a comment about how well I was handling things that seemed loaded with subtext. Most devastating of all, Sarah, Jeff's wife, called me directly. "Emily, I hope you don't mind me asking, but Jeff heard something strange from his Aunt Linda, and we just wanted to check in with you." My heart sank. "What did you hear?" "Well, Linda said that Maggie was concerned that maybe you weren't actually pregnant, that maybe you were having some kind of emotional episode or something. I told Jeff that was crazy, but he wanted me to call and make sure you were okay." I wanted to scream. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, "Sarah, I am 100% pregnant. I have a doctor, I have medical records, I have ultrasound photos. I don't know why Maggie is spreading this rumor, but it's completely false." "I believe you," Sarah said quickly. "I just wanted to make sure someone wasn't taking advantage of you or something." You know how Maggie can be protective. Protective. Right. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Daniel slept beside me. I realized that Maggie's strategy was brilliant in its cruelty. She wasn't outright calling me a liar, she was expressing concern and asking questions. She was positioning herself as the worried mother-in-law who just wanted to make sure her son wasn't being manipulated. It gave her plausible deniability while still accomplishing her goal of undermining me. But why? What did she gain from this? Did she think that if enough people doubted my pregnancy, I'd somehow, what? Admit I was lying? Break down and confess to some elaborate hoax? The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't really about the pregnancy at all. This was about control. Maggie was used to being the most important woman in Daniel's life, and my pregnancy represented a permanent shift in that dynamic. Soon, Daniel would be a father, and his priority would be our family unit, not his mother's opinions and demands. This was her last-ditch effort to maintain her position as the authority figure in our relationship. The final straw came 2 weeks later at Daniel's company picnic. I'd been looking forward to it, a chance to socialize with Daniel's colleagues and their families, to feel like part of the community instead of constantly defending myself against whispered doubts. I was talking with Rebecca Martinez, whose husband worked in Daniel's department, when she mentioned that her mother-in-law had been difficult during her own pregnancy. You just have to ignore the negativity and focus on your health, she said kindly. Though I heard from Janet that your situation is a little more complicated. Janet was the wife of Daniel's boss, Tom. A woman whose opinion carried significant weight in local social circles. Complicated how? I asked, though I already knew where this was going. Rebecca looked uncomfortable. Well, Janet mentioned that Daniel's mother had some concerns about whether the pregnancy was real. I told her that was ridiculous, of course, but she seemed to think there was some kind of family drama happening. I excused myself and walked straight to the bathroom, where I locked myself in a stall and tried not to cry. Maggie had now spread her poison to Daniel's professional circle. She was systematically destroying my reputation throughout the entire community. When I found Daniel by the grills, I pulled him aside. We need to go home. Now. What's wrong? Are you feeling sick? Your mother has told Janet Patterson that I'm faking my pregnancy. Janet Patterson, Daniel. Your boss's wife. This isn't just gossip anymore, this could affect your career. Daniel's face went white. She wouldn't. Emily, are you sure? Rebecca Martinez just warned me about it. She was trying to be nice, but Daniel, everyone is going to think I'm either crazy or manipulative, and they're going to think you're either an idiot or complicit. We left the picnic early, and Daniel spent the entire car ride making phone calls. First to his mother, then to his stepfather, then to his cousin Jeff. I could only hear his side of the conversations, but his voice got progressively more strained with each call. She swears she only mentioned her concerns to Linda and Janet, he said after hanging up. She says she had no idea it would spread like this. Daniel, I said as calmly as I could manage, your mother is a grown woman who has lived in this town for decades. She knows exactly how gossip works here. She knew that telling Janet Patterson would be like taking out a billboard on Main Street. He was quiet for a long moment. What do you want me to do? I want you to choose, I said. I want you to decide if you're going to be my husband and the father of our child, or if you're going to keep trying to manage your mother's feelings while she destroys our life. It was an ultimatum, and I hated giving it. But I was done being understanding. I was done making excuses for behavior that was becoming genuinely damaging to our future. I choose you, Daniel said firmly. I choose our family. But Emily, what can we do at this point? The rumors are already out there. I'd been thinking about that for days. I have an idea. But you're not going to like it. My next OB/GYN appointment was scheduled for the following Thursday with Dr. Helen Brooks, a no-nonsense woman in her mid-40s who'd been practicing in Willow Creek for over a decade. She was well-respected, known for her professionalism and her involvement in various community health initiatives. In other words, she was exactly the kind of person whose word would be unquestionable. During the appointment, after we'd listened to the baby's heartbeat and reviewed my latest blood work, I brought up my situation. Dr. Brooks, I have kind of an unusual request. My mother-in-law has been spreading rumors around town that I'm not actually pregnant, that I'm faking it for attention. It's becoming a real problem in my marriage and in our community. Dr. Brooks's eyebrows shot up. She's claiming you're faking a pregnancy? That's incredibly strange, and potentially harmful to your emotional well-being during what should be a happy time. It is harmful, I agreed. And I need to put a stop to it in a way that's so definitive that she can't wiggle out of it or claim she was misunderstood. I explained my plan. This coming Sunday was Mother's Day, which meant the usual family dinner at Maggie's house would be even larger than usual. Extended family would be there, including some I rarely saw. It would be the perfect audience. I was wondering if you might be willing to call me during dinner, ostensibly to check in about my health. If the call happened to be on speakerphone, and if you happened to mention specific medical details about my pregnancy. Dr. Brooks was quiet for a moment, then a slow smile spread across her face. You know, I think that's exactly the kind of medical follow-up call that a responsible physician might make. Let me check my schedule for Sunday evening. We worked out the details. Dr. Brooks would call at 6:30 p.m., right when we'd typically be sitting down to dinner. I'd put the call on speaker, claiming I needed to take it because it was my doctor. She'd ask about my 12-week appointment, mention the baby's heartbeat, and inquire about any morning sickness or other symptoms. All completely legitimate medical conversation that would also serve as undeniable proof of my pregnancy. I have to admit, Dr. Brooks said as I was leaving, I'm looking forward to this. I've seen too many women have their pregnancies questioned or minimized by family members. It's time someone learned that there are consequences for that kind of behavior. Mother's Day Sunday arrived with typical southern spring weather, warm and humid with the threat of afternoon thunderstorms. I spent extra time getting ready, choosing a dress that was still loose-fitting but had a slight suggestion of the bump that was just starting to show. I wanted to look healthy and happy, like a glowing expectant mother should. Daniel was nervous. He'd been checking his phone and adjusting his collar all afternoon. Are you sure about this? He asked for the third time as we pulled into his parents' driveway. What if it backfires somehow? How could it backfire? I asked. Either I'm pregnant or I'm not. And since I am, having a medical professional confirm it publicly should only help our situation. It's just very confrontational. My mother is going to be humiliated. Good, I said simply. She should be humiliated. She spent the last month trying to humiliate me. The house was full when we arrived. In addition to the usual Sunday crowd, Maggie had invited her mother, Daniel's grandmother Rose, her brother and sister-in-law from Charlotte, and 2 couples from their church. It was exactly the kind of audience I'd hoped for, people who mattered in Maggie's social world. Maggie greeted us at the door with air kisses and compliments about how wonderful I looked. Linda was right behind her, fussing over my dress and asking pointed questions about whether I'd been eating enough. You know, you really don't look any different than you did at Easter, Linda observed loudly. Some women show so much earlier. I was in maternity clothes by 10 weeks with both my boys. Everyone carries differently, I said mildly, accepting a glass of sweet tea from Robert. My doctor says everything is progressing perfectly normally. Oh, your doctor, Maggie said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Doctors these days will tell you anything you want to hear if you pay them enough. A few people laughed uncomfortably. Grandmother Rose, who was 83 and had no patience for nonsense, looked sharply at her daughter. Margaret Ann, that's a terrible thing to say about Dr. Brooks. She delivered half the babies in this town, including your grandson Tommy. I didn't mean Dr. Brooks specifically, Mama, Maggie backpedaled. I just meant that sometimes women can get confused about their bodies, especially when they want something so badly. The room went quiet. Daniel's jaw was tight, but he didn't say anything. This was exactly the kind of passive-aggressive comment that had been driving me crazy for weeks. Technically deniable, but clearly implying that I was either lying or delusional about my own pregnancy. I checked my phone. 6:25 p.m. Almost showtime. Dinner's ready. Maggie announced, and we all moved toward the dining room. The table was set beautifully with her mother's china and fresh flowers from her garden. It would have been a lovely family gathering if not for the underlying tension I could feel humming through the room. We were just passing the green beans when my phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID and felt my heart start to race. Oh, I'm so sorry everyone. This is Dr. Brooks, my OB-GYN. I should probably take this. She said she might call to follow up about my appointment this week. Can't it wait until after dinner? Maggie asked with a forced smile. We were just about to say grace. I'd rather not miss a call from my doctor during my first trimester, I said, standing up from the table. You know how important it is to stay on top of everything. Before anyone could protest further, I answered the phone and immediately put it on speaker. Hello, Dr. Brooks. Thank you so much for calling. Hello, Emily. Dr. Brooks's professional voice filled the room. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. I just wanted to follow up on your 12-week appointment earlier this week and see how you're feeling. The entire table went dead silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, but I kept my focus on the phone. I'm feeling really good, thank you. The morning sickness has mostly subsided, and I've been keeping up with the prenatal vitamins you recommended. Excellent. And how are you feeling about the ultrasound results? The baby's measurements were right on track for 12 weeks and 3 days, and that heartbeat was nice and strong at 165 beats per minute. I watched Maggie's face turn pale. Yes, it was so amazing to hear. Daniel and I were both thrilled. I'm glad to hear it. Have you given any more thought to the genetic screening options we discussed? At your age, the risks are very low, but some couples prefer the additional peace of mind. We're still discussing it, I said, glancing around the table. Everyone was hanging on every word. I'll let you know at my 16-week appointment. Perfect. And Emily, please don't hesitate to call if you experience any unusual symptoms. Bleeding, severe cramping, persistent nausea. The first trimester can be unpredictable, but everything looks very healthy so far. Thank you so much, Dr. Brooks. I really appreciate you taking the time to check in. Of course. Take care of yourself, and congratulations again on your pregnancy. I'll see you in 4 weeks. I hung up the phone and looked around the table. The silence was deafening. Well, I said brightly, sitting back down and reaching for my napkin. Shall we say grace now? Grandmother Rose was the first to speak. What a lovely doctor to call and check on you personally. She must really care about her patients. She's wonderful, I agreed. She's been so thorough and supportive throughout this whole process. 12 weeks and 3 days, Jeff said, clearly doing math in his head. So you're due in? Late November, Daniel said, finding his voice for the first time since the call. Around Thanksgiving. How exciting, said Mrs. Collins from church. A Thanksgiving baby. What a blessing. I looked directly at Maggie, who was staring at her plate like it held the secrets of the universe. Her face had gone from pale to flushed, and she seemed to be having trouble meeting anyone's eyes. Margaret, her brother said from across the table, didn't you mention some concerns about Emily's pregnancy at Easter? What were you worried about? The question hung in the air like smoke. Maggie looked up slowly, and I could see her calculating her options. She could double down and somehow try to suggest that Dr. Brooks was mistaken or lying. She could claim she'd been misunderstood. Or she could admit that she'd been wrong. I suppose I was just being overly cautious, she said finally. You know how protective I am of Daniel. I wanted to make sure everything was legitimate. Legitimate. Grandmother Rose's voice was sharp. Margaret, are you suggesting that Emily would lie about being pregnant? Or that Dr. Brooks would participate in some kind of deception? No, Mama, of course not. Maggie trailed off, clearly realizing that any explanation would only make things worse. Well, I think this calls for a toast, Robert said, raising his sweet tea glass. To Emily and Daniel, and our new grandchild. May God bless this pregnancy and bring us a healthy baby. Everyone raised their glasses except Maggie, who was still staring at her plate. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of congratulations, baby stories, and advice. People who had been distant or skeptical just weeks ago were now warm and enthusiastic. The shift in energy was palpable. After dinner, I excused myself to help clear the table, knowing that Maggie would follow me into the kitchen. I wasn't disappointed. The moment we were alone, she turned on me with a fury I'd never seen before. That was a cheap, manipulative stunt, she hissed, setting a stack of plates on the counter with more force than necessary. You planned this whole thing to embarrass me in my own home. You embarrassed yourself, Maggie, I said calmly, continuing to scrape plates. I didn't make you spend the last month telling everyone in town that I was faking my pregnancy. I didn't make you question my honesty or my mental health to people I barely know. I was protecting my son, she snapped. I've seen what manipulative women can do to good men, and I wasn't going to let that happen to Daniel. I set down the plate I was holding and turned to face her fully. Manipulative? Maggie, I'm pregnant with your son's child. I have medical records, ultrasound photos, and a doctor who just confirmed everything in front of your entire family. What exactly was I manipulating? You wanted attention. You wanted to be the center of everything, to have Daniel fussing over you and treating you like you're made of glass. No, I said firmly. I wanted to be believed. I wanted to be able to share the joy of my first pregnancy without having to defend myself against baseless accusations. I wanted my husband's family to support me instead of undermining me. Maggie's eyes filled with tears, but I could see the anger burning behind them. You've turned my son against me. He barely speaks to me anymore because of you. Daniel pulls away from you because of your behavior, not because of me. I've never asked him to choose between us, but you've made it impossible for him to have a relationship with both of us. And now everyone thinks I'm some kind of monster, she said, her voice breaking. My own mother looked at me like I was a stranger. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She looked small and defeated, nothing like the formidable woman who had been terrorizing me for months. Maggie, I said more gently, you could have just been happy for us. You could have been excited about becoming a grandmother. Instead, you chose to create drama and spread lies. The consequences of that are on you, not me. I'm not ready for things to change, she whispered. Daniel is my baby boy, and now he's going to have a baby of his own, and I don't know where that leaves me. It leaves you as a grandmother, I said. It leaves you with the opportunity to have a wonderful relationship with your grandchild. But that depends on whether you can accept that Daniel is a grown man who has his own family now. She was quiet for a long moment, wiping her eyes with a dish towel. I suppose I owe you an apology, she said finally. You owe me more than that, I replied. You owe me a public acknowledgement that you were wrong. You spent weeks destroying my reputation in this community. People need to hear from you that I was telling the truth all along. I can't just announce to everyone that I was wrong, she protested. It would be humiliating. Then you should have thought of that before you started spreading lies about me. We stared at each other across the kitchen, and I could see her weighing her options. She could continue to be stubborn and proud, which would likely mean continued estrangement from Daniel and no relationship with her future grandchild. Or she could swallow her pride and try to make things right. Fine, she said finally. I'll talk to Linda and Janet and a few others. I'll tell them I was wrong, that I misunderstood the situation. Thank you, I said. That's all I wanted. She nodded stiffly and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with the dishes and the satisfaction of finally being vindicated. The next week was a revelation. Word travels fast in small towns, both ways. Within days, the story of Dr. Brooks's dinner call had spread through Willow Creek's gossip network, and the narrative had completely shifted. Instead of being the woman who might be faking a pregnancy, I was now the woman whose mother-in-law had been spreading vicious rumors about her. People who had been cool and distant suddenly became warm and apologetic. Mrs. Patterson stopped by my house with a bouquet of flowers and a heartfelt apology for believing gossip instead of trusting my own eyes. The pharmacist at CVS congratulated me enthusiastically and asked about my due date. Even Janet Patterson, the boss's wife who had helped spread the rumors, approached Daniel at work to apologize and invite us to dinner. True to her word, Maggie began making quiet corrections to her previous statements. Linda was apparently mortified when she learned the truth and spent considerable effort undoing the damage she'd helped cause. Slowly but surely, the whisper campaign that had made my life miserable began to reverse itself. Daniel was transformed by the experience. Watching his mother's behavior exposed so publicly seemed to break through years of ingrained patterns. He became more protective of me, more willing to set boundaries with his family, and more confident in standing up for our marriage. I'm sorry it took me so long to really see what was happening, he told me one evening as we sat on our porch swing, my head on his shoulder. I kept making excuses for her behavior because I didn't want to believe my mother could be so cruel. It's hard to see the people we love clearly sometimes, I said. But I'm glad you finally saw it. I never want you to go through something like that again, he said firmly. From now on, our family comes first. Always. 3 weeks after the Sunday dinner showdown, Daniel and I spent a Saturday afternoon painting the nursery. We'd chosen a soft yellow color, wanting to keep the baby's gender a surprise until birth. As I carefully painted around the window trim, I reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. My relationship with Maggie wasn't exactly warm, but it was civil and respectful. She'd made genuine efforts to repair the damage she'd caused, reaching out to people individually to correct her previous statements. She'd also started following some pregnancy and grandparenting blogs, which Daniel reported she'd been sharing articles from with him. "You know," Daniel said, taking a break from assembling the crib, "I think my mom is actually excited about the baby now. She asked me yesterday what color we painted the nursery and whether we needed any baby furniture." "That's progress," I said, and I meant it. I didn't need Maggie to love me, but I needed her to respect me and be a positive presence in our child's life. Claire had come over to help with the painting, and she'd been uncharacteristically quiet for the past hour. "You know what I learned from watching all this?" she said finally, setting down her paintbrush. "Sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to drag their behavior into the light. All that time you spent being diplomatic and trying to take the high road just enabled her to keep hurting you." "I still think there's value in trying to work things out quietly first," I said. "But you're right that some people only respond to public consequences." "Your doctor call was genius," Claire continued. "It was so perfectly executed. Medical authority, witnesses, undeniable proof. She had nowhere to hide." Daniel laughed. "I was terrified it would backfire somehow. But seeing my mother's face when Dr. Brooks started talking about heartbeat and measurements, I think that was the moment she realized she'd gone too far." "Do you think she really believed I was faking it?" I asked. "Or was she just trying to cause problems?" Daniel considered the question carefully. "I think she wanted to believe you were faking it because it would mean I wasn't really moving on and starting my own family. But deep down, she knew you were telling the truth. She just hoped that if she created enough doubt, maybe it would somehow change the situation." "Well, it definitely changed the situation," I said, running my hand over my now visible bump. "Just not the way she hoped." As the sun set outside our nursery window, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in months. The baby was healthy, my marriage was stronger, and my place in the community was secure. Maggie's whisper campaign had failed, and more importantly, I'd learned that I was capable of fighting for myself and my family when it really mattered. The revenge had been sweet, but the aftermath was even better. Sometimes standing up to a bully doesn't just stop their behavior, it changes the entire dynamic of the relationship. Maggie now knew that I wasn't going to be a pushover, that attacking me would have consequences, and that Daniel would choose his wife and child over keeping his mother happy. As for me, I learned that there's a difference between being diplomatic and being a doormat. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a family is refuse to enable toxic behavior, even when it's uncomfortable and messy. Our baby was due in just 4 months, and I couldn't wait to meet the little person who had already taught us so much about standing up for what matters. The nursery was ready, our marriage was stronger than ever, and Sunday dinners were actually enjoyable again. Maggie Carter had tried to make me doubt myself, but instead, she'd helped me find my voice. And that, perhaps more than any revenge, was the real victory.